Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation where we explore the underlying connections and root causes of the ideas and current events which shape our lives. Today we are going to talk about classic movies, a little bit of pop culture, January 6th, and we'll see what else is going on.
Some Israeli fallout.
In the world.
Israeli
the world's
war,
a little nuts
the
right
impact
now.
of it. Yep.
Okay.
Totally agreed.
You wanted to, Mike, you were talking about classic movies. I had a strong claim that
Well,
I
Darren
don't
was
think
talking
there's
about
such a
classic
thing as
movies.
classic movies because the movie genre is so young. And therefore, everybody's version of classic movies is either what they watched as a kid or what their grandparents were
Well, that
watching when they were
part's
young.
True, but I don't know if I would say that's classic. That's their favorite.
That's
That's the thing that impacted them the most.
But
I think you gotta go with classic for this reason.
Okay.
That it's a legitimate word.
A
A car.
Yeah.
A car is a classic 25 years.
If
25
it's
years.
still considered amazing 25 years later. So that
But
puts us
but
in the
there's a-
mid-90s right now.
Yeah.
late
so
90s.
I think you
You
can,
can have classic movies.
But
what classic cars were there in
1998?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know that question. But my point
The Camaro.
being that
You don't need hundreds of years to have classics.
Oh, I see.
It's sufficient to have. There's something that can be big enough in a genre. Now, whether music or like cars, and that they 25 years is enough, that's a different question.
But
I think it has to be 25. I think it needs to be more than 25 years, but it has to still be relevant and connect, right? And the problem I find is so few, and so maybe I'm arguing they exist. There's so few movies because movies were just so
Yeah, see,
different.
I don't agree
40
with
years
that.
ago.
I would
Say this. It's not that they have to be connected today, because your point about age is right. If you go on and look at greatest movies and gets reviewed, whether it's IMDb or if it's Rotten Tomatoes or if it's, there's a host of them.
Yeah.
You can tell how old the reviewers are by the movies that are put there. So I'll tell you a great example. Citizen Kane
Yeah.
is a great example. It's a classic movie. It is not super enjoyable to watch today because what we do technologically is so significantly different. But what it did technologically in its time was Matrix. Remember, Matrix was the bullets, the real-time bullets.
Bullet time. Yeah.
That was new, had never been done before, right?
What you're talking about is where the camera, it seems like slow motion, but the camera's moving around as the slow
and it
motion
had the
event
little
happens.
trail of
the bullets, and he flails backwards and misses him.
Yeah.
That whole thing was new,
Right.
and it revolutionized. And I'm sure that
Citizen Kane had like 10 things like that.
it did,
Or more.
but they're nothing to us.
But they're nothing to us because they're so ubiquitous.
That's right.
So everything we see in movies now started
right.
at Citizen Kane as far as style, cinematography.
or certain things, not everything, but there are
So-
certain
yeah, right.
things
So
that
many
started.
started.
And
so what
I think Citizen Kane is worth watching from a movie perspective, and it's a classic. But that doesn't mean I would enjoy it the way I would enjoy a more contemporary film that may never even have the same point or same significance as Citizen
But
Kane.
I think I think you could make that same argument with classic books. That you try to read them, and you got to really focus to enjoy
It's
some
true.
of those, right?
That's true.
I have yet to meet, I think, maybe 2 people who've ever actually finished Moby Dick.
Yeah, or Ivanhoe.
Yeah.
So
Walter Scott was a phenomenally successful writer. Nobody reads his Waverly novels today because it's just too hard. We're too removed from the language.
But what I see with, and I think
And cadence.
music works this way too, right? Everybody has a nostalgia
Yeah.
for the music of their teen years,
That's true.
especially when they're like 18 to 22.
that part, yeah.
Because it's like, oh, now I'm out on my own.
Yeah.
I'm forming my identity, or
And
I'm the
movies
things.
Participate in that.
Movies are part of that.
Yeah,
too.
they
Yeah.
You go back to when you're a kid, there's an impact they have on you. And it's understandable because you pass through transitions in your life, a couple of them, I think, in which you're awakening to the world.
So,
So
then,
then, by this argument,
because Star Wars was, I mean, the year I was born, the first Star Wars came
Yeah.
out. It still holds up.
Yeah.
You watch it, it still's moving, it's still interesting.
Well,
And it formed a genre too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, without getting too Star Warsy, but keeping it in this line of interesting, what did you think of the because they basically made 4, 5, and 6, and then go back and make 1, 2, and 3. And I don't care, some people love it, some people hate that. I'm not asking this. I'm asking
the level of production was so much more significant because of the advancement of technology.
In episodes 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that when the battle with Luke and Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back, Empire Strikes Back, right?
Okay, where his hand gets cut off.
Yeah, all of that. It's laughably immature, the battle scene. You compare it to the Phantom Menace when they had that Sith guy.
The acrobatics.
Oh my goodness. It was mesmerizing, the martial arts sophistication.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And then Luke is swinging like he's got a baseball bat, and that's all they know how to do is swing overhead and hack as if they're Jedi Sith warriors, trained in the arts, all this stuff.
But you're also there is an argument to be made because George Lucas has a hand in both those, and I think he would have said this if he hasn't already. That Luke is very untrained when he goes, right? He shouldn't have gone in The Empire Strikes Back because he didn't really know how to do it. He hadn't trained in lightsabers. He's trained in picking up rocks and climbing vines.
Yeah.
And then the other side, you have this geriatric,
Vader
debilitated, disabled, old guy in a suit who can barely move around.
That's right.
So that is the kind of sword fight you're going to get between those two guys, and the same with.
Oh well, wait a minute now. Wait a minute now. What about Yoda, who's like 700 years old? In the first three, when they redid him, he fights Count whatever his name is.
Dooku, yeah.
He has the aerobatics of a young Robin.
Well, he doesn't do any fighting in the first three.
No, he doesn't.
Right.
But he's still, by the time he is in that one, he's still like 600 or 700 years old.
Yeah.
Talk about geriatric.
Yeah, well, I guess. But part of what I'm saying is that there was a purpose in George Lucas, and I remember watching Episode 1, right, and being in the theaters and excited, and I was right in that age, and seeing how the Jedi moved and the portraying that the Jedi actually, if you were trained, if you were part of this society, there were powers that we hadn't even realized were possible, and you get a glimpse of it in Return of the Jedi, but even then, it's just a glimpse. Yeah.
What did you think on this note about the integration of Episode 3 having to fit Episode 4 made 30 years earlier or 20 years earlier?
I don't. There was a point in actually Episode 2 where I gave up caring.
Okay.
When he's talking, like the whiny Anakin,
Yes, I know that was
supposedly falling in love with this beautiful.
That was tough.
And why would she love him? And he was so pathetic. And
Yeah, that was tough.
that whole thing, it just lost me.
He was petulant.
Yeah. All right.
So did we resolve classic movies?
Well, I think we found a couple.
Yeah.
We'll have to go hunting for some more.
All right. Well, we don't only talk about nerdy topics here, but hopefully you enjoyed that. If you are enjoying what we do, and maybe somebody that you know would enjoy it too, click that like and help us out, support what we're doing, subscribe, and send us a question, a comment on YouTube, actually. I want to comment on YouTube. We have actually gotten a few lately, and it's kind of fun. Some of them less friendly than others, but I'm down for that too.
Yeah.
All right, pop culture question. All right.
Pop culture. And I don't know what this is.
I'm going to spring this one on you.
All right, go.
So recently, my family, we've had
moved the camera.
eras where we watch Survivor.
Oh, okay.
And I try to resist it, and then I get drawn in.
Okay.
I actually kept Survivor out of my house for, I don't know, maybe a year because we'd watched a bunch. And it's so amoral, right? The whole premise of the game.
Yes,
and everybody
that's
watching it is so like, what if I was there? Could I even pull this off, right? And I think Survivor was the first really big reality show.
Yeah.
22 years it's been going on. Was it the beginning of the end of our culture? That's my question.
Okay, let me ask the question of you.
Okay.
So I've seen them recently. I may have watched a little bit at the very beginning, but I don't remember any because I wasn't interested in it personally. But the ones I've seen recently, the thing that has bothered me the most is the deception. It's based upon your excellence in deception.
Right.
It is promoting lying.
Not just deception, but betrayal.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
And for that, and we could talk about that if you wanted, but that's a big turnoff for me.
Right.
Now, my question is, did that dynamic exist in the first shows?
It did.
Did it exist on accident, or was it? Because it feels like it's the point of the show now. Feels like it's a drama. It's a soap opera for men based upon betrayal.
I wouldn't say
shot my.
It's definitely a soap opera. I wouldn't say it's for men necessarily. Because
Well, I
of the
shouldn't-
people
I
I know
didn't
who are
mean
really
that.
interested in it, it's almost exclusively women.
I didn't mean it that way, but it's not the romance betrayal. It's
Oh,
another
yeah.
kind.
That's right. That's
It's
true.
a more masculinated, or that's not a word, but it's not this romance centered.
Right. Yeah.
It's
It's
something
winning,
else.
Which has a masculine element.
Yeah.
Although we both know plenty of women who are
Yeah,
competitive.
yeah. So
Yeah.
was
So
it
what I see,
inherent
what
in
I
the
see
first?
inherent in, like the reason I would have never watched romance based soap operas, and I think I hadn't thought of it that way as romance versus victory. But the reason I would never watch a soap opera is it feels like I'm just gossiping about fictional characters, right? The whole premise of the show is
Okay.
like gossip.
So there's
and people
a
get together
layer.
and gossip about what was on the
Yep,
show, right?
yep,
And
yep.
Survivor's the same way.
Yeah.
So it does have this weird gossipy element, not to mention, and this is why soap operas are fun, because it's people living out the immorality that I can't do in my constrained
that's
life.
correct.
But the weird thing about Survivor and reality shows generally is it's also inviting you to join. Every show he says, you know, you've been watching for years, come beyond Survivor. And I calculated 22, I don't know how many, 15 contestants in 22 years, 44 seasons. We're at 650 plus people that have been on Survivor. It's crazy.
Well,
So was it originally built around the betrayal component of alliances and voting off, or was it built upon surviving difficulties and voting off the weak member?
So it always has that aspect of voting off the
That's
weak
what I
member.
remember from the earliest stages.
But it definitely always has that plot twist. This person changed their allegiance, and that made all the difference.
and allies
By
shift.
shift.
yeah.
And
And
there's
that's
an
been
element
part
of
from the
secret.
beginning.
Right.
What I sensed from the beginning, though, is that was a part of it. But that what I sense now is that the element of betrayal is the juicy tidbit.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
And
and it creates the plot twist, right? Like when you're
Yeah.
watching a movie, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't
Yeah.
believe that happened.
Yeah.
The other side of it too is there's so much open lying. It's like built in. I mean, one of the characters, one of the
Yeah.
guys we were watching, and he said, he was creating all this sneak and chaos, and he's like, these aren't the rules at home, but I'm not at home,
Yeah.
And he knew it, and everybody does know it. So it's
So
this weird game show, but it creates
yep.
this totally
Your
permission
question
to
is
be
a good
immoral.
one.
I don't know if I know what I think about that. Maybe it can something be the start of something, but not intend to. It was unintended, but it was a downhill slide, so to speak. Because I remember the first one, I really wasn't personally interested, but I could see how it could be interesting, especially the physicality of it and what, the thing
That part is interesting.
Yeah.
So, like in this season that we're watching, there are multiple guys who have studied it in depth before they arrive,
Yeah.
but they portray to the other contestants that they haven't.
Yes.
So there's,
Yeah.
which is smart, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, okay, there's
Yeah.
this like, why is this a
A
serpent kind of
mind game.
dynamic?
Yeah.
One guy said he had built the puzzles in his house and like 3D printed them and practiced them because they'll use the same puzzle from 2 years ago
I see.
again. So they're building dozens and dozens of these.
Yeah.
Another guy said he had built this whole replica of one of these things that you have to like pull strings to get a ball to move and
Yeah.
it balances.
Yeah.
So they're invested.
Well, let me add another question then. How does this overlay with Kardashians time-wise?
I have no idea.
Or Jersey Shore?
I mean, 22 years.
Yeah.
Survivor was the beginning. As far as I know,
As far as the whole genre of reality shows, it was the beginning.
Really.
And I feel like what reality shows brought into the culture was this permission to gossip on a level that wasn't present before. Because even if you have like a fictional series, I mean, that's why the soap operas are kind of pushed to the margins of like, oh, that's kind of beneath us, right? We want to watch a hero's journey. We want to watch someone battle against nature. We want to see the development of a character, but this is the devolution of a character. Like
Yeah.
we're moving down.
Yeah.
We're sliding into.
Did you see the battle, the OJ, the documentary dispatched with Cuba
Gooding Jr.?
Yeah.
No.
It was quite excellent. But one of the things they portray in there is Mr. Kardashian. I forget his first name now, but he's an
His lawyer.
attorney,
Yeah.
and he's part of the lawyers. He's not the main lawyer, but he's a friend.
Okay.
And you see these tween girls, and they're obsessed with their father on TV and the TV coverage of it.
Right.
And what was so intriguing to me, there was the whole OJ behind the scenes kind of thing that they were trying to display. That was interesting. But was almost equally as interesting is to think about these Kardashian girls and the perception of what fame is, and the adjustment that they took, being famous for accomplishing nothing really, especially at the beginning. Now they've developed themselves. I mean, Khloe Kardashian is one of the richest billionaires, entrepreneurial clothing and makeup and fashion and all these things, right? So she's actually done something, but it didn't start that way. It started as fame for its own sake, and I wonder if that's in the 90s. Right?
I don't know.
Well, yeah,
I mean, OJ was in the 90s.
Yes, well, that's when this happens. That's when these girls see this, and they parlay what they see and experience into something. And I'm wondering if part of the overlap is internet and TV and cell phone recording, just the technological shift.
They call it the democratization of fame, right? The internet and social media have created the ability for any kind of good-looking teenager with an outgoing personality and ambitious desires to go for it. What I see is definitely, it feels like the chasing popularity of late middle school is basically expanded into the fame and fame culture. I can go biblical with this. I have a theory about the temptations of Christ, right? And one of them is to throw yourself down from the peak, the highest point of the temple. I think that temptation was not only to test God, to make God save me, right? As if you could, but also that if you went and threw yourself down and were caught by an angel in front of the temple, in the courts, with a seat of power and culture, you would be instantly famous. I think there was a fame desire built in. And I think part of greed, the lust of the eyes, it's not just pride to say I'm better, I'm well known, but the greed of attention and accolade and fame is intertwined.
That's interesting. I have a similar perspective on the temptations, but I put the one you just explained in the showing of the glories of the kingdoms and offering them to Jesus.
Oh, I see.
That there was real glory in it. It wasn't fake. It wasn't false.
Right.
It was real, but it was subservient.
And so that's not pride, that's greed.
That's
greed for
greed
power.
and glory, fame.
Interesting.
That is, but the main point is that it was real. It was a real offer.
Oh, yeah. I have no doubt.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's our two leading.
There's our pop
What do we
culture.
got our main stuff going on today?
Well, okay, I wanted to bring something up, and this is also a biblical question. What is the role of beauty? I've been watching these pastors, okay, and they're in these arguments on Twitter. And I like to watch pastors argue. I just think it's interesting. Sometimes it gets ridiculous.
You mean watch the words, because you're not talking like you want to see them at a conference on the stage. You don't
That
mean
would be
visually.
fun, but that's not. No,
Okay,
they snipe at each other, and it's essentially conservatives versus middle of the road, and it's mega churches versus like the guys on the edges. Okay, but one pastor was extolling the virtue of men being strong.
Okay.
And that to me seems a standard issue. Like, be strong, don't be weak, right?
Okay.
But in particular, there was a physical strength was part of that. And we've talked about this a little bit before. And so they argued because some other pastor said no, and everybody wants to quote that physical strength has some value, but spiritual strength has eternal value. And I was like, okay, some value though. It's not nothing.
That's true.
But it was like, it felt like children, right? Almost arguing over this topic. But it made me think of the other side, which is beauty. What's the role of beauty in a Christian world, in a Christian life? Should women pursue beauty? I know the Bible redefines it.
You're flipping it.
Yeah. So should women in particular, should men appreciate beauty? And I'm talking physical beauty. And here's actually what brought it up to my mind to combine these two, and is that Victoria's Secret has, for the last several years, tried to go woke and put on lesbian soccer players and overweight women as their models. And it hasn't worked. They've lost billions.
Yeah,
25%.
And
their valuation has dropped. So they've gone back on it this week. They said, we're going to go back to what we were doing before.
Yeah.
But what they were doing before is essentially sexualizing, hypersexualizing women's underwear.
Yeah.
I remember as a teenager, and my friends go to their rooms and they've got the Victoria's Secret catalog.
Mm-hmm.
So part of me thinks, I don't think it's going to work that they're going to go back to the sexualization, because the world is so much more sexual than it was in 1996, right? And so, but at the same time, I've heard these conservative commentators like Matt Walsh sort of celebrating that we're going back to real beauty. And I think that's not real beauty.
In the context of Victoria's Secret, you said that?
Yeah. And part of the reason that they're gloating is that the woke mentality doesn't work, right? And people won't buy that.
Yeah.
But it feels like this celebration of debauchery still.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, going away from that, I know it was going woke to a direction that's not going to work, but it was also a genuine reflection of Jesus' teaching that men's lustful gaze is a dysfunction that needs to be rejected. Mm-hmm. So I'm sort of feel this like, okay, we need a Christian. It's not a middle, because they're both wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what you think about it.
Well, my first thought has nothing to do with the topic. My first thought is the challenge of victory when you're losing. And so we quote the woke failures as a victory. And all they are, if Bud Light ends up never recovering, conservative commentators is going to be this big woke thing. I mean, this big victory lap. And it's kind of sad because overall, the victory, there's not a victory going on in this particular war overall.
Yeah.
Though I want to bring up the possibility that there may be after the post-Israel stuff. But so one of the things that strikes me about it is how I don't know Matt Walsh, but there could be plenty of pastors who would have at one point said, Victoria's Secret, because you have to create some place for a married woman, let's say, wanting to buy something that is intended for a private audience.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the legitimacy of that.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
So you have to make a container of it and whatnot. But then is Victoria's Secret that? Or have they spilled out of that container and gone to soft porn?
Yeah.
And so I would think a lot of Christians would say that has become soft porn. Can't even take my kids to the shopping mall. If we do, we need to walk over here because they have displayed up on the windows. And so you have where the Christian critique is legitimate, but it's gotten so bad that now they critique and celebrate back to the position where they would have critiqued before.
Which is the classic conservative move, right?
Yeah.
We want the liberalism of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the other side of that, too, is the culture has become so sexualized that there is good old days of all that we had to deal with was underwear versus graphic nudity and depictions of actual sex.
That's true. I do have another thought on it, though, but it's going to, I imagine it's going to be deeply dissatisfying to you.
I'll brace myself.
This puts me in a struggle of something that I've never been able to reconcile. And what I end up thinking is that we have to live in the tension points of two things that are true, but not all true. And that is creation and redemption. From a biblical perspective, we live with two driving forces in our world.
Yeah.
The creation force that is original, native to us, it's the air we breathe, but it's been corrupted. But it still has good things in it, and real things.
Yeah.
That's strength, that's beauty, that's all these things. But there's a redemptive dynamic in the world. That is saying, and so you have, that is saying, let me finish it, that is saying, this thing's burning up. This thing's a house on fire. Mm-hmm. Rescue what's important. Rescue people. And now out of this emerges two Christianized movements. The one that says we need to make hospitals, we need to do art, and we need to live the redeemed life to the full glory of what God meant for it to be.
Sure.
The other pathway says the house is on fire. Quit worrying about the house. Save the people that are in it. Don't worry about culture or making art. Stupid stuff.
Okay.
That's the fundamentalist thing that I grew up in as a kid, and I think probably you did in some respects as well.
Yeah.
And so to me, they both say something that's true. And so your question about beauty is it's one of these creation things. And so is the redemptive impulse of Scripture designed
to not care about that anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it designed to rescue and let it have its full blossom? And so where I end up coming to is I always feel torn on this. Always. And when I allow one of them to take me and start pulling me, I end up in an error down the road. I end up promoting too much beauty or strength or art or literature or whatever thing is up, and forget it's going to burn up. It doesn't matter. Then I jump in the other vehicle and start redemption and evangelism and people's souls. But unto what?
Right.
They're not angels yet. We're not angels yet. And so I think there's this tension point where both have a truth. And I think let them tug at each other because I don't know how to live in the middle personally. I cannot get to balance. I really makes one way or then the other by reaction.
It makes me think of a sermon, John Piper sermon I heard when I first started catching John Piper. And that was about the Queen Mary cruise ship. And during World War II, it was converted into a troop transport.
Okay, right.
And now, and maybe not anymore, but after the war was over, they turned it into a museum.
Yeah.
And so one half of each room they maintained as a troop transport, and the other half of the room they turned it into a luxury, cruise ship for the wealthy.
Yeah.
And so what his claim was, John Piper, is that this is an example of what Christians should have, a wartime mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That in war, can you appreciate beauty? Maybe all the more, right? Maybe you see beauty in just the tiniest thing because it's in the midst of so much darkness.
Yeah.
But once you start thinking you're not in war anymore is when you go wrong.
Yes, that's right. Exactly.
Which actually, it reminds me of the Patton conversation we had last week.
Yeah.
Is like once you think the purpose of the army, America's in this problem right now. Once you think the purpose of the army is social engineering and fairness rather than destroying enemies,
yes,
you're in trouble.
And even World War II, the monuments, man, I don't know if I read the book and saw the movie. And what was intriguing mostly about the book is the history behind the impulse to say, because Hitler is gathering and destroying art.
Right.
And the impulse behind the preservation of art, an entire unit is devoted to this by the top military brass saying, I don't know what the percents would be, 95% of our resources are going, it's probably even more than that, maybe 99, toward winning this war and defeating the bad guys.
Right.
And saving civilization. But let's not forget, and we're going to allocate resources to finding and preserving art.
Yeah.
You're not called to kill anybody. You're not called to resist anybody. Go find the stuff that's beautiful so that we have a purpose when we win this war.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I like that illustration. I like the Piper illustration too. But that's what I think of the beauty one. I want to say two different things, and they're both true depending on the moment. But yes,
You know, maybe it is. There's something in beauty that makes you want to worship it. And once you do, you ruin it.
That's true.
And I think that's what we're describing. And that's true of wealth. It's true of all sorts of things, right? Where once you turn wealth on itself and say the purpose of wealth is to gain more wealth.
This is the problem with the creation mandate. As creatures, even Christians, our fallen principle makes it so that we can't go into the creation mandate full force and flesh it out. We will corrupt it every single time.
Yeah.
We have to live with a foot in the creation mandate and with a foot in the redemption mandate. And if we ever put two in both camps, we lose big time. And so I think the beauty thing is a good point, but it has to be reserved, on reserve or intention.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that you have to be intentional about.
Yeah.
You can't just by default, right, say, oh, I thought about that a few years ago and now I've got it figured out.
There is something
I
else
also
to
would
say,
the whole, because I don't know if you quoted the strength is good for physical exercise, has a limited value.
Right.
Because that's one of the verses I think of all the time. Because you and I end up talking about this topic in different other ways, and we have different points of emphasis that we end up aiming towards or being inclined towards. When you said it that way, I thought about beauty. Do I think the same thing about beauty?
Does it have value?
Yeah. Is it in that same paradigm? It has a bit of value, but not the point of emphasis. And I think it's true based upon the same
1 Timothy, where he says, don't be women, as talking to women, and he's saying to them, don't be dressing yourself up, which I don't think has anything to do in the context with wearing something nice, either jewelry or there's a few things listed there, pearls and whatnot. But I think that it's this: don't aim at shoring up beauty when that is going away for everybody.
Right.
Don't be that person who has to look like a model when you're 58. You are not 28 anymore. Don't try to be 28 anymore.
Well, we all know it's a little sad when you see someone.
It is.
Right.
And it's on male, and the male part was addressed earlier in the context.
Well, and how many men are out there taking testosterone today, trying to keep
That's
that
exactly right.
30-year-old, 40,
That's right.
you know.
That's right. So that's what I think about it, where it's a good thing, but it's not the main thing.
There's something more to strength, though, and I don't want to beat this topic too far, but that is that in strength, you have a capacity to resist evil, that if you let your body be degraded, right? If you eat whatever you want, your sleep is dysfunctional, like you won't be able to resist evil on the same with the same capacity, right? And because evil is going to attack your will, and there's something about your will that pursuing strength,
and I don't disagree.
Builds up.
But what about this challenge?
Okay.
In the passage of protecting, the war we're in, it just doesn't make the point you're making.
Tell me more.
Ephesians 6.
Okay.
Paul never starts out with saying, now the first thing you got to remember is stay in good shape. Because this is really going to affect your capacity to be spiritually engaged in this war that we're really in.
Because it's a battle of will, though. Right?
Well,
to stand requires will.
Yes and no. Because yes, I don't disagree, but the thing there is not will. In fact, take up the helmet of salvation. You've submitted your will to another.
Well, you take your stand. And
that's correct.
You resist.
That's
all a battle of will.
Stand.
Yeah. The will to keep going, the will to stand firm, the will to speak out. All those things are things that if you haven't developed your will, if you're weak-willed,
and that's why I think
you're going to fail.
Truth in what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's the emphasis. What would I want to say? Or how about this? I would want to say that there's a snare in the promotion of will.
Okay.
And that is that it's something we all want, and we get caught into it. And Jesus, in his own struggle for will, comes to a place where what's before him is so significant. He says, if it was possible, I'd like to not go through this.
Right.
But not my will, but your will.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I would say that will is a good with a trap to be deceived as an idol. Because we end up having to crucify our will even while we exert it.
Well, what I'm talking about with respect to willpower versus you can have willpower that's rebellious, and then you'll be in trouble.
That's true.
You can have willpower that is submitted to Christ and obedient to what he commands, and it will be empowered by the Holy Spirit. But what I'm saying is you can't expect in the physical to be lazy all the time, and then suddenly in the spiritual to be strong.
I agree with that.
And it really comes down to, and I think we mentioned this a few months ago, the idea of what's the purpose of physical strength. And this was a conversation I had with my boys, right? Is it that you would be healthy? I think no, that shouldn't be the primary, even though it is true.
Yes.
Is it that you'll look good with your shirt off, right? I mean, that's a lot of people's priority, and it comes to mind, as middle-aged men, right? You take your shirt off, you're in the mirror, and you think, it just is.
Yeah.
And then but the real idea is that you can do mighty deeds, right? So as a young man, maybe that's sports. As a young father for me, or a father of teenagers, it's chasing my sons to keep up with them, to participate in the things they want to do. It won't be long before it'll be my grandkids, right? And say, all right, I'm going to keep chasing. I'm going to keep running to live this life well that God's given me to do, and not end up in a chair watching Fox News.
Okay, so I don't necessarily disagree with that. Well, let me add a question and see how you hear it.
Okay.
Paul, when he says, I buffet my body.
Yeah.
Unto what? I think he would say, if he were going to use your words of mighty deeds, he would really say, so that I can travel to Asia. I think he wanted to go to Spain. I think is where he wanted to go.
Well, doesn't the second half of that to be obedient, to make it obedient to Christ?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole point is when he thinks of what he wants to do, mighty deeds, he's taking that realm out of mighty deeds according to the flesh and according to what strength would need.
Mm-hmm.
But the mighty deeds that he's envisioning doing, that strength that needed buffeting of his body was only going to help him to be able to do that.
Yeah.
He's shipwrecked 3 times. If you're super overweight, you probably don't survive the first one.
Right. Yeah.
He's beaten with the last -1. The Jewish law, their technicality, was to go 1 under. So he's beaten by his own countrymen. I think it's 3 times. Or maybe 6 times. This is significant amount.
Numerous times.
Yeah.
So
to be able,
That's
right.
Part of what I think about that is, and this is the role I think of fasting and other things, is that there is a self-indulgence to the pursuit of strength that you see in popular culture, right? That you're going to have a physique, that you're going to take extra supplements to a degree that, right? Everybody's going to look at you and say, well, that guy lifts, right?
Yeah.
I find it hard to imagine that anyone would have looked at the Apostle Paul and made that conclusion.
I think so too.
But at the same time, he was someone whose goal was to control his body,
Yeah.
that it was
I agree.
submitted.
That's right. I agree
So
with that.
so fasting is a kind of strength
Yeah.
that's not the same as deadlift.
That's right.
Right?
That's
and
right.
squat.
That's right.
But both require it, both cultivate it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a place for it.
I agree. He
Exercised himself physically, I think, unto his calling from God, which was an evangelism, itinerant missionary.
Yeah.
And who was going to face suffering. He was, what's his name? Go tell him how much he's going to suffer for my name.
Right. Yeah.
He knew that from the beginning.
All right, let's talk about, should we talk about January 6th?
Go for it.
All right, so I was listening to a guy who's been part of defending the people who've been arrested, and many of them now have been jailed and sentenced to many years.
Yeah.
But I think he's a documentarian, and so he's getting footage from the Capitol videos,
Yeah.
right? Surveillance cameras that showed with clarity that several of the Capitol police officers who testified in the trials that sent these men and women to prison perjured themselves.
Yeah.
They made claims that they were in places that the video shows they weren't.
Yeah.
They were across the street even. But they made those claims to create this narrative that these guys were intending to do something violent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So there's something about this January 6th, and it's I think it's tied to the whole narrative of the stolen election. There's something about it that conservatives keep their hands off of, where the J6 guys are like lepers to the conservative movement. You'll hear them mentioned, but no one will ever beat the drum about it.
Particularly the leaders.
Particularly the leaders who, and I think it's kind of like this, oh, only stupid people think that kind of thing, right? Which is
You read Wall Street
connected
Journal
with Trump.
argument, the false argument that Trump says was stolen.
Right. And I think the embarrassment with Trump, and that a lot of his followers and a lot of those people that day were kind of rednecks and less educated, right? It all kind of bleeds into this unclean mentality. But here was the rub.
Towns like Scio, people came.
I know. Here's the rub, though, and that is that because Gates undermined and then unseated Speaker of the House, that documentarian who was about to release footage lost permission to make public, because the Speaker of the House controls what they do with the video surveillance footage.
Okay.
He lost access to it because there's no speaker.
Okay.
So now men and women are in prison based on perjury. They would have been released potentially by now, but because of all these Republican shenanigans, they can't. And it's shocking to me that
You're pretty optimistic, though, that to say they would have been released by now, as if justice would have prevailed. I mean, a lot of not justice has been prevailing, right? I mean, maybe, I'm not discounting the whole point of your argument,
right.
but it's not as if, if this piece hadn't been hampered, the whole cases would have been falling apart. That's just not true. They have put these people in jail and prison in spite of the evidence. Right?
Well, but they were perjuring themselves to a degree that it was... Sorry, one of the cameras died. They were perjuring themselves to a degree that it created the motive, that created the charge.
Yeah.
And so if you can throw out the charge, you should be able to throw out
Yeah.
the whole verdict.
Yeah.
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 And nothing is, well, the whole thing about the footage has struck me as something that blazed on the scene for like 3 days and then totally got put in the closet.
Yeah.
And it was all around the Tucker Carlson stuff, because if you remember what was released, which McCarthy did,
Yeah.
he released it all to Tucker Carlson, and Fox News basically squashed it.
Well, that is, I think it's the same hands-off, unclean kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And that is the I want to be respectable, let's just keep things the way they are, end of Republican is also what's undermined Jordan from being able to gain the speakership. And now who knows what kind of squish Republican is going to give away the next. And it's all fueled by, this is crazy, it's all fueled by these giant budget bills that they push through that fund the military-industrial complex. Who was it? Mitch McConnell was out the other day talking about Ukraine. And he literally said, this Ukraine war is great because no Americans are dying and we're getting rid of Russia. You know, so one of our opponents, we're harming them, and we're funding the military-industrial complex. Like, he didn't say those words, but we're funding these giant contractors because all we're doing...
on the American economy.
The supposed billions that we've given to Ukraine, we didn't give to Ukraine. We gave to American military contractors to pay and to buy more equipment for the U.S. and take all of our old equipment and send it over.
From companies that
All the relatives of the congressmen have their relatives on their boards.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And the reason that McConnell's doing that is because he cares about Russia when China is clearly the largest threat to U.S. influence in the world. But McConnell, like Biden, has contacts and makes millions of dollars from his Chinese communications and contracts.
But part of what shocks me about that is that Americans are so asleep at the wheel that they can just that would have been an accusation against Republicans that they would have denied in the 90s, right? That, oh, you're just in it to get your corporate benefactors more contracts.
Yeah.
No way, we're in it for the people, right?
Yeah.
Now they just openly say it, and the Americans just shrug.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's what we thought.
So summarize when you said January 6th revelations. Summarize your point.
Well, so the point is that the January 6th defendants are being unjustly imprisoned.
Correct.
Based on evidence that's being suppressed by the political machine.
Yeah.
And the reason, not only is it being suppressed to keep Trump out.
By both sides of it.
By Republicans directly at this point, right? But also it's being suppressed to keep the machine running that keeps the checks going. And I think they know, I think they know that the economic collapse is coming, that these dollars are going to go to zero, and they don't really care. They're just getting what they can get, assuming they'll survive.
Zero. It'll never
go to zero. It'll be greatly reduced, but they'll still be on the inside. Maybe it's small.
Well, and that's just it. Is the global? If America is unseated as the sole global superpower, right?
Yeah.
Then these American corporations, which see themselves as above our government and our nation,
that's right,
will have to a higher degree, become multinational.
Yeah.
Which they really are, because it's the same weapon systems that go over to Europe and Australia and all these, but they don't go into China yet, right?
Yeah.
China has to make their own weapon systems, so maybe we can globalize it further. So these guys are invested in. If you see your main benefactor as the United States economy keeps your corporation alive, right? They're your main customer, and you see them dwindling, you got to go look for markets. That's how it works. So they're globalizing military-industrial complex.
I just over
the weekend read a little 78-page booklet that I've been meaning to read from Angela Codeville. And it is on how, and this was written in 2007. 2007? Right before, 2008 or 9, right after Obama had been elected. Anyway, it is predicting why, we call it the uniparty now, but he was calling it the ruling class. And he called the rest of it the country class, not meaning country like outside the cities, but the rest of the country.
The actual country.
And that it isn't Republican, Democrat, is not the dividing lines. It's this inside aligned with government and everybody else.
Right.
And that they are lining their own pockets.
And I just found it intriguing to read about that, because he said basically the exact same point, that they are working together, and he was making the point even back then
before it become clear to me, and I think I was really on the same wave as the culture rather than ahead of it. But that the Bushes and Obamas and Clintons are all the same.
Right.
Very slight differences. But they're inside government creating what they do in order to enrich themselves.
Well, and you see that in the sense that Bush, all the wars that Bush started, Obama kept going. They didn't stop
that's
them.
right. That's
in
right.
fact, he ratcheted them up.
Yeah. So I agree with you. The J6 stuff is, I think it was in particular tied to the events that the Democrats feared might happen at the Electoral College vote.
Right.
And so they put themselves into some kind of mode of session where they could bypass comments from the floor, because I think there was like 100 or 89 senators who had said, or congressmen mostly, and some senators that were going to say there's been problems with this the 2020 elections, and they were going to bring it to the floor, and they didn't want that. So by declaring an emergency and creating an emergency, I think, that they were able to put themselves in an emergency-style session, which cut short those things. And so I think that was the first thing. And then I think the second thing now is that they have seen it as an opportunity to humiliate, to intentionally wreak havoc. And I personally think this is Obama's energy behind the scenes through the lens of Biden and the Biden DOJ, and Biden this and Biden that, because it's technically his administration.
Yeah.
But I think it's the Obama energy to unleash retribution and humiliation.
So this connects a little bit to Israel, because
It does connect to Israel.
because I think Obama, our theory, right, that we are looking for evidence for, but is that Obama's running everything. It makes total sense.
Or the majority, let's call it that.
But it's starting to make less sense, because as I watch how America right now, how the Biden administration is handling the Israel situation, I think it's just getting worse. Like they don't know what they're doing.
But here's the thing.
Which
to me, if I'm Obama, I'm backing away from it.
They are. I just read an article today that Obama, he doesn't write any articles, but he reads it and says, okay, that'll work. In which he basically is trying to give a moderating voice that is insulting Israel in the process, equates them to Hamas and the American, that we have done atrocities in our past and whatnot, and we behaved poorly in 9/11 and retribution. And
so therefore murder babies in their beds.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but what I think the dilemma is, I don't know that I see it in the way you just said as less of an argument. I just think that what you have is, when you have a tiger by the tail, sometimes it bites your hand too.
Yeah.
And I think that BLM, they had a tiger by the tail. And they unleashed something in the summer of 2020 that they're grateful it turned out the way it did. But I think the Iranian funding that they've promoted that has gone to Hezbollah and now Hamas and this thing, maybe they didn't want it to go so fast so far. Maybe they would regret that. But that's what happens when you unleash a tiger.
See, and I see it more nefarious than that, in the sense that this is the time of year before the 2020 election when we started. No, before the 2020 election.
Okay.
So 2019 October, we started hearing about a virus in China. I wonder what that's about. And so right now, and I've been waiting for something to drop. What's the big thing they're going to bring for this next election to create the chaos that causes enough people to cry out for tyranny to save us from the chaos?
Do you have an idea? Do you have a guess?
So I think, and I think this because I've heard it from multiple sources now who claim connection with intelligence agencies, which we know lie to us all the time, that there is a planned attack, such as the Hamas attacks were, in American cities in the coming weeks.
Okay.
And that they've been bringing them in, and there's even been large numbers of people going across the Mexican border from the Middle East and being caught. Right. Yeah. And so there's tens of thousands of these.
With terrorist ties.
With terrorist ties coming into the U.S. And so you set up these cells. Yeah. You could set them up all over the U.S.
So here's the reality. We're a little switching gears towards the Israeli stuff.
Yeah.
And what I'm calling the long tail effects of it, of October 7. I agree. What has happened, though, has been shocking. And so what it is exposed to a degree that only the right commentators were saying before. They're saying the immigration, we have no border right now. That's effectively no border.
Yeah.
This is insanity. You can't survive with no border, right? And everyone's saying, you gotta be kidding me. You're ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're going to get more strawberry pickers? Like, what's that going to hurt?
Yeah, and all these different reasons, which one of the articles I read was talking about Thomas Sowell and his distinction between an unconstrained vision and a constrained vision that causes the differences in political opinions. The unconstrained vision of humanity is that we're perfectible. We can make Eden. And so open up the borders, bring in the poor, give them asylum, do all these ideologically idealistic things that are good, and all the good reasons, and the strawberry pickers, and whatever you want to say. You can list 20 to 30 of them.
He said
the other view is a constrained vision, he called it, in which he says it's the belief that mankind has a corruption going on. And that what we have to do is preserve ourselves from it getting out of hand.
Right. That the purpose of government is to mitigate
damage.
That's right.
And so the article I just read says the day of the delusion died. And I read another article that said a political reawakening. They're asking the question, is wokeness took a hit with the bombing? Did the idea of this unconstrained idealistic vision take a hit? Because now all of a sudden it's not just you and I probably have read more articles than most from people on the right saying this is crazy to have no borders.
Yeah.
But now there are people that, let's call them current centrists, which are far left from before, right? But they're saying, we have millions of people here.
Yeah.
That could happen to us. And they're shocked by the barbarity of what took place, to where now they're saying, oh my goodness, we might be in trouble. How many are here with the same agenda that we don't know about? And so you see this element of even the Biden administration saying, we need to put some wall stuff up. Which I don't think they believe that at all.
No.
It's just to, we better say some of these other words and do some of these other things, because that's kind of scary.
Yeah, I could see that. I heard someone talking about how many Jews are going to be swayed toward Republican voting. And the commentator I was listening to, his take was it doesn't really matter because, if you get 100,000 Jews in New York City decide to vote Republican, New York, it's not going to change New York's electoral college. But what I thought was it's undeniable that there are a lot of really influential Jews, especially in news and culture and media. And you see that in the fact that even the craziest statements that come out from college professors and even some celebrities in favor of Hamas, they all backtrack.
Yeah.
Right? Because they know where their bread is buttered. Okay. So could you see those folks, right? Those influential Jews who've said, okay, well, we want social justice and we're going to use it in our favor and craft a narrative, right, that gains us power and all those things, which is what everybody does. It's not unique to Jews in any way. But now that their Jewish identity has been now tied and brought into America as, hey, we need to buckle down here, you could see a conservative shift among the funders of the thought leaders, right? That might be interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I have an article here by Dennis Prager. The Hamas slaughter confirmed everything I believed. And he says, I wasn't surprised by any of what happened, other than that Israel was unprepared, he said. But he says, all along I felt, even since the 70s, he says his professors, the Arab, the Jewish people, they believed that the difficulty had to do with land. And he says it's always been about Muslim rejection of a Jewish state in their midst and a religious desire to annihilate it.
Right.
He goes on to make the point that, well, actually he does a great illustration. He goes, think about these two questions. If tomorrow, and you can think of this today, he asked this question years ago, but if tomorrow Israel laid down its arms and announced, we will fight no more, what would happen? Second question, if the Arab countries around Israel laid down their arms and said, we will fight no more, what would happen tomorrow? That is his exact answer. The first one, they'd be destroyed, annihilated. And the second, there'd be peace. And he goes, why is this? And then he just makes a statement, because Israel's the chosen people. Right? And I just thought that's interesting.
It's interesting because he is a non-messianic Jew, and in this sense, he talks about the Messiah for Christians. He acknowledges that Jesus is somebody that's important to us as Christians, but not the Messiah from his perspective.
Right. He famously says, good people go to heaven, right? And the bad people don't.
Yeah.
And it's good people who want to do good. And he includes...
Without getting into a heaven conversation in the Old Testament, a Jew perspective, Judaistic perspective that stops with the New Testament, you and I view 400 years of silence. We've heard that phrase, right? From the last prophet or the writing of the Second Chronicles into when the prophet John comes. 400 years of silence. Well, if you think about from a Judaistic perspective, it's 2,400 years of silence.
Right.
They haven't had a prophet in 2,400 years.
Right. So in that sense, he's viewing still as covenantally, we're still the chosen people by God, and we've suffered horrific things, but if we keep Torah, we go to be with God.
Well, and they are still the chosen people in the sense of that they carry still, I firmly believe, the promises God made to Abraham, right? But they are not pleasing God. They are not worshiping him as he requires because they've rejected his son. And so that is a complication, but it doesn't change the fact that those people bear the name of Yahweh. And so if there's a people group in a specific location that the hordes of hell want to destroy the name of God, they're going to be the target every time. Mm-hmm. Because you can destroy Christians, but here's the crazy thing. More Christians have been annihilated in the last month than Jews in Armenia.
Yep. He says,
and nobody's doing any rallies
Jews
about that.
The most hated people in the world, and I don't know if that's true. I think if you look at the history of the world, there's been more Christians put to death.
Well, even if you said the Jews are the most hated people right now, the answer is no, they're not.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Christians are prosecuted, persecuted, genocidal victims, right? Currently,
now I'm
in
curious
Azerbaijan.
Let me make a statement about the Abraham thing you said, and you give a response to it. But I don't want to get stuck on it too much because I want to finish this other stuff with Israel. But if I made the statement, there is a unique connection between Israel and Abraham, and God made a covenant with Abraham that extends itself out to include the world, Jewish, the descendants of Abraham, as well as the non-descendants.
Right.
And then in the middle of that, it was a specific covenant with Israel. But that covenant is over. The covenant of Moses, they broke it, it says in the prophets, and as well in the destruction. Most Christian theologians would say that this was God's affirmation that this covenant is broken.
By the destruction of the temple in 70 AD.
That's right. But it's fulfillment by, so you could view the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant, and Israel's in both. And Israel is still under Abrahamic covenantal blessings. I will do this.
Right.
The Mosaic version that took was for a season and is no longer present. It doesn't mean that, and the replacement was really the new covenant. This is a new covenant. Ezekiel talked about it, Jeremiah talked about it. It's in the New Testament.
So it was prophesied that there would be a new covenant.
A new covenant, and that now the new covenant is under Jesus.
So are there examples when a new covenant would replace an old covenant? Like I think of the covenants with Noah, with David. Are they replaced, or is it an additive only?
Okay, before I give an answer, though, are you being set up here with a replacement theology question?
I don't know.
No,
I haven't studied it.
Okay.
I just assume, like
that
the
word's
Bible
a loaded
says,
word, replacement.
No, I know that much.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, the assumption I hear in your logic is that covenants can end.
Yes, correct.
But I'm thinking, okay, what's another example of covenants ending? Because the Bible doesn't say it ended. Mm-hmm. We're taking evidence from the destruction of the temple.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the prophets, it says you broke my covenant.
Right.
The covenant.
But they did that over and over again.
Yes.
So what's significantly different now?
I don't remember.
Except
I don't have
Christ
the verse
comes.
in my head. Yes.
The language, I don't remember where. I'd have to get back to you on that. It's stronger than the chastisements and disciplines and comments that were made before. Mm-hmm. So there was a difference. I would say there was a distinction when there was you violated my covenant versus the language seems to be broke it and it's over.
Right.
That kind of thing.
So what even those prophecies, though, are talking about the exiles into Babylon. That seems to be what they're prophesying as the end, right? So then when Nehemiah and friends come back and rebuild the temple, the second temple, we don't have any prophecies about the end of that. So that's why I think, okay, we're quoting prophecies about the judgment God brought on
Jeremiah
them.
was about the southern tribes. I don't remember exactly
where Ezekiel was. I think he was in the same era too. They were all with the southern kingdom, not the northern ones.
But were they prophesying about the judgment of God in the Babylonian captivity, or in the later one with the I don't remember who came. The Assyrians came for the second one.
Yeah.
For the southern tribes.
Yeah.
So the first one is not viewed as a captivity. It's a dispersion that's never recovered from. The 10 northern tribes are never.
Right.
They're never brought back.
The legends go far and wide as to where they
The
ended up.
second group, the two southern kingdoms, are put with this prediction that they'll be returned to the land. And that's Jeremiah.
But what I'm saying is, how can we attribute prophecies, and we're probably going too deep like you were worried we would do. Ezekiel's prophecies
is actually in the land
there, not in Israel.
He's in exile.
Right. And so so those are the two big Old Testament ones that say a new covenant. I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel.
So they're prophesying of Christ.
Yeah.
Yes,
but
does that end? How does that end the Mosaic?
Well,
Christ fulfilled it, and therefore it's completed.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Okay,
I'm just curious. That's what I think that it was. But the reason I reacted earlier because replacement theology is the idea that Israel has no more place, and that the church has replaced Israel entirely one-for-one ratio.
Yeah, I was going to look up this verse.
I don't embrace that
because it says, and I never did. It says in the Bible, right? Jesus says it is written. I think that's enough. That as long as the sun and the moon and the stars, God will still look upon the children of Abraham with special favor. Like His covenant with them will never end, as long as the creation exists.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'd be interested in that verse, where that is. I don't know.
It's written.
Yeah,
I'm not going to go well either.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to pause for a second. This podcast is supported as a part of the Trinity School. It's a culture-building enterprise that includes education, influence, industry, and the arts. If you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School in building communities that honor Christ, you can donate to our efforts by going to gracedayton.com/Trinity School.
Okay, let me read a quote to you or a couple quotes from Barry Weiss.
Okay.
And we're still talking Israel. Yeah.
Political reawakening. Is there a mass emergence from the woke slumber because of who knows if it'll stick, 9/11?
So these are kind of semi-conservative authors of Jewish heritage who are hoping that maybe the Jews will wake up.
Well, they're left
of center, the old left of center. Now they're being lumped in.
That's why I call them semi-conservative.
Yeah. Something has changed since the attacks on Israel, she writes.
Okay.
Now, here's what she quotes this thing, which is interesting. He goes, these people, friends of theirs, say, man, this one person says, I went to bed, a woke liberal, I'm very proud of it. I got up after October 7, said, not anymore. I'm a conscientious objector. I'm now one of them says a 65-year-old conservative.
Okay, so here's my question though.
Yeah.
Was the change the fact that Hamas attacked? To me,
No.
would have been unsurprising.
No.
It was the support
Yes.
that the West was giving to Hamas, even wealthy and powerful people.
And
Demonstrations.
Yeah.
You mentioned some last one about Portland. Harvard in particular has been egregious.
Yeah.
The assaults that are taking place in London. And the things, the German chancellor said, we're going to kick out Palestinian refugees that have come here. We're going to exile them. We're removing them from our country.
Wow.
In Hungary, there was another one. They did a certain other thing. Yes, all these things.
You know who else
said
said we should do that?
Who?
Ron DeSantis.
Ron
He
DeSantis?
said if anybody's on a visa,
That's right.
a student
We should kick
visa
him out.
that's calling for supporting violence
Yeah.
or terrorism,
Yeah.
we're going to remove it.
So this person who has said they've undergone a transition in one day from being woke liberal to conservative. They said so much of the work that happened in the Trump administration turns out to have been right. And that's what is so frustrating for me. The work on the border wall, we didn't like the messenger. So we killed the message.
Yeah.
Turned out it was right. Issuing long-term debt to refinance when rates were zero, we didn't like the message, so we killed the message.
a structural peace in the Middle East, we didn't like the messenger, so we killed the message. When are we going to stop shooting ourselves in the foot, and when are we going to actually see and take time to look past who is saying things and actually listen to them word for word? And so very wise goes on then after that quote and say, what's going on here? And she thinks part of the answer is the sheer depravity of Hamas' terrorism. That was your first point.
Okay.
But then it's this, it's the reaction. That depravity has made the justification and celebration of their acts by those people who police pronouns that much starker.
Yep.
The contradictions and moral bankruptcy of a worldview that spends years worrying about microaggressions and tone policing, but can't decide what side is on after the beheading of babies, they're not exactly difficult to spot. This is wokeness, right?
Yep.
Now here's another one. The events, this is quoting from another article, the events of the last week have shattered the illusion that wokeness is about protecting victims and standing up for persecuted minorities. This ideology is, and has always been, about the one thing many of us have told you it is about for years: power.
Yeah.
And after the last 2 weeks, there can be no doubt about how these people will use any power they seize. They will seek to destroy in any way they can those who disagree. And I think that's really interesting.
I totally agree with that, but I want to add something to it, and it's actually going to tie into my other thought around this. I think it's power, but it's fueled by a bloodlust that is racist underneath. So I'm going to read you a quote, and then I'm going to tie it into the Middle East. So this is from Jack Posobiec. He says, they don't hate colonization, they hate whites.
Yes.
They don't hate oppression, they hate whites. They don't hate racism, they hate whites. They hate whites, and they will happily employ colonization, oppression, and racism against them.
Yeah.
Jews are seen as white people in Israel.
That's true.
That's why they're against them.
But do you think it's the whiteness, or do you think it's the Euro / Jewish? That's background is Judeo-Christian. Is it God?
So there is a connection, a strong connection between European culture and Christianity.
That's right.
I mean, the fact that more people visit Europe every year to go see church buildings than people who live in Europe. More people will visit.
That's right. The gospel has transformed the Western civilization and become its foundation, displacing, it is really on Platonic philosophy, but it displaced it and became the anchor point of all Western civilization. That's what I think.
But here's why I think it can't just be Christianity. And I think the power part goes into it. Because if you look at South America, it's intensely Christian, probably more than North America by a lot now. But it's Catholic, and it's not powerful in the world stage. So to say it's just attacking Christianity seems insufficient. There's a power dynamic that's built into it as well.
So would you modify that to say Christianity, but in particular, where God seems to be present and active? Because he's not. You could say Christianity is widely spread, but that doesn't mean it is having all of the influence it could have.
I mean, Mary's making regular appearances to different villages throughout. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I definitely, when we visited Peru, and it's been a long time, when I was in college, we did a trip down there, and almost everyone we met, we said, do you want to know Jesus for yourself? They'd never heard that as an option, right? They wanted to know God, but he felt distant and part of the big complex hierarchy that Catholic Church creates.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely a cultural emptiness to their Christianity that doesn't seep into the fabric.
Yeah.
But if you look at how empty is our culture, and yet they're still tearing, they're going to burn it down, and that's the power seeking. But what I think the racial component adds to it, because everybody's shocked when they're screaming bloody murder, literally, for Jewish people, but nobody's shocked when they've been doing it for white people for years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there is a real bloodlust there. And what a racialized bloodlust does is it'll ignite people who never will obtain any power.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not sure how much I think whiteness or the God connection to whiteness. Because look at the January 6th. The guy, the leader of the Proud Boys, he's Hispanic.
Yeah.
They gave him 22 years, and they're looking to do war. He wasn't even there on the day.
But what's the accusation? that they're white supremacists.
Yeah, white supremacists.
It's
But
putting
it's-
white people at
it's
the center
not
of it.
really-
Even
But white supremacists could fall in that category of colonialization, or all the words they're willing to use.
right.
What's at its root, I think, is a civilizational approach based upon God is a creator and we owe him something and he's given us liberty to go and be free. Where that is, and it happened, because I don't know that it is just white people. I think there are other people. I think Thomas Sowell, Justice Thomas has been, he's not white. And they hate him with an undivided passion, and same with Alito, and he's Hispanic.
But I mean, I have a friend who grew up in, he's black and he grew up in poverty in a community predominantly black. He was a kid who got good grades. He did well in school. Yeah. And so what's the accusation by his peers? That he's acting white.
Yeah, Oreo.
Yeah. So the idea is there is a narrative under the surface, and it's the victim narrative.
Yes.
That the people who succeed are keeping us down.
Yes, that's right.
But with the racial component, there's a racial component that matters to me. Not because I'm white.
Yeah.
Or because I'm afraid for my children.
Yeah.
Although I kind of am.
Yeah.
But because I think inside of us, there is like I almost want to make evolutionary arguments, right? Even though I don't believe in evolution as a fundamental theory of how things got here. But there's something intrinsic in humans that we want to identify with those who look like us and see those who look different as enemies. And that there's a tapping into that in the political conversation right now that creates a bloodlust that sheer political power doesn't.
Harvard kids. You don't get more white than that.
Yeah.
The biggest constituency of woke is newly graduated young moms who are white, grew up with middle class affluence.
Yeah.
Right?
But the leaders of all that stuff, the ones who are outspoken, they're not white.
Yeah.
And you know what they tell the white people to do? To shut up and pay our bills.
Yeah. Atone for your guilt.
And so they're paying for the bloodlust because of their own guilt.
Yeah,
for real.
Well, so it's interesting you say bloodlust. I agree with that.
That's what I was trying to get at last week when I said, or last time we were together, and I said, I'm revising the idea of woke from a religious movement. There are religious components, but now I'm thinking it really is a movement to destroy. And here's what I find interesting about these comments. I've seen more articles recently with the phrase, for the last 2 days, illegal immigration, which had stopped being used, right? Illegal immigration, you weren't supposed to say that. It's being said again.
Really?
Yeah.
In the mainstream media sources.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But even in the right side, they've stopped saying it. It's been slowly worked itself out of the conversation. But what I find interesting about this is the similarities to World War I. World War I faced a progressive post-millennial doctrine among the churches, what we would call liberal churches, but that distinction was only in the process of being made at that time, so it's not a fair one to project all the way back. But post-millennial in that we are going to idealize and hospital and education and good works and all these things into the kingdom of God coming back, right?
It's a Christian utopia.
It is. It's that
unconstrained vision.
Yeah.
When World War I happened, it was shocking to the civilized world, right? It was shocking, and it destroyed postmillennialism in the church, and it destroyed that sense of idealism that people had. They were shocked out of it. The last sentence Barry Weiss puts in our article is, the other aspect of this is, we think, the sense of how thin the line is between civilization and barbarism.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. Wokeness only exists within the civilized confines. I'm mad at you because you used a word that put a woman down, or she could have interpreted it as devaluing her. But if we're at war for survival, you and I don't care about that word.
No.
We don't care about that. We are trying to live, and we're facing the brutality of an opponent, which I think is interesting that in China and in the Middle East, I think our wokeness as a nation in America and Europe in particular is a sign of weakness to them. we
do
do not have the strength to defend ourselves. We don't have the courage, the guts, the kahunas, whatever idiom you want to use.
Well, it's not only that, they are stoking it. That's what the Chinese.
think
That's what
that's
Chinese.
correct.
Chinese don't care about TikTok, so they can gain our data.
I totally agree with
so
you.
they can manipulate the narrative and
It's fracturing.
draw our kids
Yeah.
into an effeminate, victimized mentality,
Yeah.
so that they can be conquered.
What
And
if,
that is what the woke mind virus is doing. Is it's
Yeah.
conquering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in a negative, in a roundabout way, it's saying it's promoting something first, but it's exposing.
It's
It's
using
using moral
superiority
superiority as a weapon.
Yeah, and what it ends up doing is it makes vulnerable the whole nation.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they are existing in order to make our nation vulnerable to China or the Middle East. I don't think they use those terms. I think they want to just slap down everybody who used to tell them it's wrong to be homosexual.
I'm
not saying the woke are doing that.
Yeah.
I was just referring to TikTok in particular.
Yeah,
which is controlled by the Chinese government.
Yes, that's
But
right.
what I think the mentality or the narrative that's functioning, influencing liberals, let's say, is giving them permission to tap into a level of evil that's in all of us that has been repressed by civilization, right? Religion fundamentally.
Yes,
that we
that's right.
push down our sinful, evil desires.
You meant repress in the positive way.
I do, yeah.
Yes, right.
And it was so successful that people stopped believing it existed.
Yes, I think that is exactly
But so
right.
now they're unleashing a level of hatred within themselves that they don't even recognize.
That's exactly right. And
And
it
so now
shocks
it's
them.
well, I don't think it shocks them enough
Well-
because they'll unleash a level of hatred that's murderous
Yes.
in intent, and then say, "Why are you so hateful?"
Yeah, yeah. So the
One of the shocking ones is the Harvard kids, right?
The
The things they're saying are embarrassing Harvard.
and
They don't know what to do about it. The authorities, the grown-ups. These 25-year-olds. They're pro-Palestinian, but they are not saying the hateful things to the same degrees that the students are
Yeah.
saying.
Kill all the Jews.
Yeah.
The final solution kind of stuff.
That
kind of word. And so I think what happens is then Barry Weiss's world sphere of engagement is with people who are probably closer to center than like she is. And they're the ones that she's writing about saying, wow, they're going to move away from woke. Maybe. Right? Well, she's seeing it happen.
Yeah.
So
I think you have a wide spectrum, but I just think it's interesting. And as a Christian, I think one of the things we have to say is that we believe there's this narrative that all the way back to the crucifixion of Jesus is that evil always goes too far and works its own defeat. That's what happens with Jesus. If they had known he was the Lord of glory, they would not have put him to death. Now, that doesn't necessarily imply that they would have, because they would have worshipped him. But had they known, they didn't quite realize what they were doing, seems to be saying.
Yeah, it works its own defeat in the long run,
That's right.
but it's never actually defeated till good people rise up and stop it.
That's an interesting. I was thinking about that phrase. I'm not sure if I. What is it? The something success of evil is that good men do nothing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that phrase this week, and I
was thinking, I don't know if I agree with that phrase.
But
We'll put that on a
next
teaser.
time.
All right. We're at our hour and 20 here, so I just wanted to say, if you're still listening, we appreciate you, and you get a bonus point for lasting this long in the episode. This has been On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, and if you enjoyed this episode or found something to reconsider, share it with a friend, start a good conversation, and remember, dig a little deeper and think again. We'll see you next time.